Good morning, guys.
Morning.
The audio.
Good morning.
Danny, I like the change of scene.
I'm in Georgia right now.
Are you the guy they sent to adjust the votes?
He's becoming a resident so he can vote.
Hello. Can you guys hear? Oh,
Yes.
Nice over here. All right. Danny's freezing outdoors somewhere.
It's not so cold. It's nice and crisp.
Okay,
It's beautiful out here. Okay, you could see. This is what's behind me.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah, mamish. Look at that.
Danny, where are you?
Some national park in Georgia. It's called Stone Mountain, Georgia.
All right, Chevra, here we go. Heading into
Enjoy.
the final stretch over here. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Kuv Gimel. We left off on Daf Kuv Beis Amid Beis, 9 lines before the bottom of the Amid by the Mishnah Koishrim Nima Bamigdash. We are continuing to learn the series of Mishnayos that differentiate between that which is permitted in the Migdash and the same is not permitted anywhere outside the Migdash, known as Medina. Even though most of these halachas are connected to the one rule that Ein Shavus Bamigdash, the first Mishnah, the first sugya that we will learn today, whether when you have a musical instrument whose cord snapped on Shabbos, whether you can fix it by knotting it or not, knotting a torn cord, a keshet, is an Isur Da'iraisa. How can you do an Isur Da'iraisa in the Beis HaMikdash? As we'll learn, as Rashi explains, being that Avodah is Doiches Shabbos, we are going with the opinion, says the Rabbeinu Yonasan, which is really a machloikis, whether Iker Shira Beper or whether Iker Shira Bekeli. We're following the sugya that the main mitzvah of the Levium singing along is to play musical instruments, and therefore, since the avodah is doicha, you can actually make a kshira according to our Tana, which is normally an Isur Doiraisa, even though that it is the playing of the instrument that's doicha Shabbos. But our Mishnah is following Rabbi Eliezer that holds that even preliminaries, even machshirei mitzvah, right? We had that in the Shabbos Kuflamid regarding machshirei milah. Here we are applying it to our case over here, fixing an instrument to something that is permitted to be done in the Migdash and obviously not the Medina. Many details about the sugya. On Daf Kov Gimel, we're going to be learning about whether one is allowed to remove a wart from an animal on Shabbos. An animal that has a wart is not kosher to be used as a korban. So removing the wart renders the animal fit for a korban. The issue of removing the wart, we will learn Rashi, it's connected to goizes, any malacha that's done in an unusual way renders that malacha only asur midrabanan. So taking off the word biyad, which normally would be only an isur derabanan, will be permitted in the Beis HaMikdash because of the rule that ein shvus b'mikdash. We're going to spend some time on Daf Kuf Gimel pointing out that there is a Mishnah in Pesachim that appears to contradict the Mishnah in ERUVIN. We're going to have various ways to reconcile it. We're going to continue on Daf Kuf Gimel Amid Beis with the next Mishnah that's speaking about whether a kohen is allowed to put on some sort of grass reed on a wound that he has on his finger. Now, a reed grass has a curative effect. This does go into the general Isur Derabanan, that we're not allowed to take medicines on Shabbos because we might end up grinding herbs. Now, even though, as we already mentioned, Ein Shvus B'Mikdash normally is only used when it's directly connected to an Avodah, but as we'll learn that a Kohen doing the Avodah with a exposed wound is unseemly. So it's considered Avodah connected, which is why we will permit it in the Mikdash. That's going to lead us into a sugya whether how can he have anything other than the Arba Bigadim? Isn't Yitur Bigadim something that's prohibited? So we're going to have Rabbi Yechanan, Yitur Bigadim is only B'makim HaBigadim. We're going to have Shitas Rava that says that any item that is 3 by 3 finger breadths or larger, only then is it called a beged. Something that's smaller than that is not called a beged, and a lot more. Let's start Chevron Daf Kuf Beis Amid Beis. Again, 9 lines from the bottom of the Amid by the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Koishrim Nima B'Mikdash. Like Rashi says, look inside Rashi, 7 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Nimas Kinar Shel Shir Halavim. So he has a harp, or he has a guitar, or any sort of stringed instrument. That Im Nifsuka B'Shabbos, if the string snapped on Shabbos, this is fundamental. As the Gemara will show, that when do we say Machshirei Mitzvah, Taka overrides Shabbos? The Avodah, the playing of the instrument, that for sure overrides Shabbos. Fixing the instrument is called preliminary mitzvah, Machshirei Mitzvah. Our Tana holds, when is Machshirei Mitzvah Deiches Shabbos? Only if you could not have done it from before Shabbos. Very similar to the Daf Kuf Lamed on Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva. Right, Rabbi Eliezer doesn't subscribe to that. Rabbi Eliezer holds that even if you could have done something, you could have prepared the knife for the milah before Shabbos, but you didn't, you also may do it on Shabbos. But over there we have the Rabbi Akiva, as we'll find over here, Ashitas Chachamim that explicitly say that Machshirei Mitzvah is Doiches Shabbos only if you could not have prepared it beforehand. And that means that you can't string an instrument lachatchila. But if the instrument was prepared on Shabbos, it snapped. There's nothing you could have done before Shabbos it was functioning. Here, yes, even fixing it as Doiches Shabbos, even if you're violating the Doiraisa, which is making a knot, so holds the Tana of
Rabbi.
Yes.
The case of knotting the cord.
Yes.
Is that preferable to replacing the cord, or we're just saying that because he doesn't have another cord to put on the instrument?
We're going to see these details in the Gemara. Okay. Now, Aboloi b'Medina. Why not b'Medina here? Not because Shvus, because there's an Isur Doiraisa to make a kasher. Okay. However, Im Batchila means if you knew before Shabbos that you have to fix the instrument and you chose not to do so, so our Tana holds kan v'kan, not only b'Medina, but even b'Mikdash, it's asur, like Rashi just pointed out, Machshirei Mitzvah Doichen Shabbos, only if there was no option to have done it beforehand, and that's not the case of Batchila. Okay, asks the Gemara V'Riminu. We learned to Braisa, Nimaski Nor Shenifsika, that if you have a string from a harp or from any stringed instrument that snapped again on Shabbos, Zok the Braisa Lo Yehoya Koishra Ela Oinva, you're not allowed to make a knot. A knot is an Isur Doiraisa. You are only allowed to make a bow. Now, other than the Tana of Rabbi Yehuda that we learned in Shabbos, that does not differentiate between a knot and a bow, all the other Tanoim do make such a difference. And they hold that since a bow by nature doesn't last that long, so therefore it's only Asur Midrabanan. So therefore, you're only allowed to fix it on a way with at max you're violating an Isur Darabanan, but this Tana holds you may not violate an Isur D'Oraisa. So the Gemara says like Kasha, the Braisa follows the Rabbanan, and our Mishnah follows Rabbi Eliezer. In other words, the Rabbanan don't hold that even Machshire mitzvah are Doiche Shabbos. Mitzvah is Doiche Shabbos. Machshire mitzvah is not Doiche Shabbos. So therefore, you can't violate an Isur D'Oraisa. Our Mishnah follows Rabbi Eliezer. And the Gemara explains, Li Rabbi Eliezer, Dama Machshire mitzvah Doiche Nasa Shabbos. So therefore, you are even allowed to make a knot, which otherwise would have been an Isur D'Oraisa. The Braisa, which follows the Shitas Rabbanan, they hold that Ein Doichen, and therefore, what do? You have to be Oinva. Right away, counters, think about it, that's not 100% correct. If our Mishnah would have followed Rabbi Eliezer, like we just spoke out, like we had in Rabbi Eliezer the Milah, Rabbi Eliezer holds that Machshire mitzvah are Doiche Shabbos, even if you would have been able to have fixed it before Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer holds that you can lechatchila string an instrument. Rabbi Eliezer holds you can make a knife for the Milah on Shabbos, even though you could have done beforehand. Our Mishnah certainly is not the Shitas Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara says, Elolei Kasha. The difference between the Mishnah and the Braisa is whether a bow is b'chlal different than a knot. Our Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda. Making a bow and making a knot is the same thing. You're not benefiting by making a bow. A bow is also asur midoraisa. The Braisa follows Shitas Rabbanan that does differentiate. So instead of violating an Isur D'Oraisa, b'chlal there's a klal. Violate something which otherwise would have been asur midrabbanan. But the Gemara says you didn't answer my question. Okay, our Mishnah, let's say, follows Rabbi Yehuda. I get it. But who is the author of our Braisa? If it's going to be Rabbi Eliezer, we're back to the same question. Rabbi Yehuda liba demand dafkuf gimel. If taka, there's no difference between a kesher, between a knot and a bow. But why does our Mishnah not allow you lachatchila to string it? It must be because it doesn't follow Rabbi Eliezer. Because if our Mishnah would have followed Rabbi Eliezer, then afilu lachatchila nami. Now, guys, I know that again. You look in the Mishnah and Shabbos, you'll see Rabbi Akiva is the one over there that says clearly something that you could have done before is not doiche Shabbos machshirei. Something that you could not have done before, then he's moida to Rabbi Eliezer, that it's doiche Shabbos. We're not quoting Rabbi Akiva because we're going to find something better. We're going to find the Tana that's speaking about our din. It's speaking about fixing a stringed instrument that clearly only partially holds like Rabbi Eliezer. In other words, we agree that not only is the mitzvah doiche Shabbos, but also machshirei mitzvah doiche Shabbos. If the avoid is doiche Shabbos, so the machshirei avoid is doiche Shabbos, but only if there was no other option, when you had no option to fix it prior. And who is that? That's the Rabbanon of the following Braisa of Rab Shimon. And therefore, let's go back. The Braisa that says Oinva will be Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon Rabbanon. The Tanya Ben Levi Shenifseko Loi Nima Bekinoid. Here clearly again, not that he didn't prepare the instrument before. He did everything he could before Shabbos. On Shabbos, it snapped. The kinor, the violin, the harp. So then koishra. See, the Chachamim hold koishra clearly. Now the Chachamim say koishra, not that lechatchila you can do it. This Braisa is when the thing was prepared beforehand. It snapped on Shabbos. Rab Shimon says oinvom. So first of all, clearly you see it's a machlokes tanoim. So the Braisa that we quoted on Daf Kuf Beis Amud Beis is Shitas Rab Shimon, and our Mishnah clearly follows this Chachamim. And here we see clearly that they only allow you to make a kesher because it was shenifsek aloi nima, not that he didn't prepare the kinor beforehand. And now we have a third opinion. Rab Shimon ben Elazar Omer. Now listen, making a knot and or making a bow doesn't really fix the problem. Whoever here is a musician will know that ideally you don't want to have any knots or bows on your string. You want it to be a wholesome string. So afi eino mashmas esakoil doesn't produce, let's say, a proper tone. It doesn't produce a proper sound. So Ella, what do? This is basically what Danny was saying before. B'chlal, even today, you look at people's guitars. I'm just familiar with that. My kids play guitar. So you have by the peg, there is extra cord. And it's wrapped around. So wherever it is that it's torn, don't fix the torn. Basically, you already have on your instrument extra cord. use that. Now, some of the cord is wrapped around the lower peg, some extra cord is also wrapped around the higher peg. Fix it in a way that it demands of you to do the least work. Now, fixing a guitar by putting on a new cord is also an Isur Doiraisa. You know what we're going to call this? MERCAVA patish. So it's not that we're doing a malacha that's, so to say, lesser of a malacha. Kaisher is not good, and MERCAVA patish is not good. He's just giving a detail. If you have to violate, and we are allowed to violate, even in Isur Doiraisa, to have the string instrument, then do it properly, fix it properly. Either use the additional strands that are on the lower peg and use that, extending it upwards, or mishalshal from the extra strand that you have on the higher peg and put it down, tie it down, wrap it around milmata. Okay, this detail is not to get to our sugya. What we found here is the shita of the Chachamim that's ascribed partially to Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim here are mamish like Rabbi Akiva in Rabbi Eliezer Demila. Ve'iba yisema hava harabanan. And the reason why the Braisa says oinva is because v'loi kasha kan be'emsa the Mishnah, which allows you to make a knot. Listen, guys, even when we are allowed to violate the Shabbos, if there is no need, or if you can get away with only violating a Derabanan, you do that. Making a bow, not Rabbi Yehuda, is only a rabbinic. Making a knot is Doiraisa. Again, you have to be a musician. If it snapped in middle, there only a kesher will fix it. So that's the Mishnah. You make a kesher. When the Braisa says that you should make a bow, that's because it was minatzad. Minatzad means that since it snapped near the peg, over there's less tension. There, the bow will resolve the problem. So even though it justifies to violate a doiraisa, that's only if you need. If you don't need, make a bow. Now here Rashi beautifully says that don't think. See, before we were not clear in Shitas Rab Shimon vis-a-vis this question: is machshira mitzvah doiche Shabbos even if you could have done it beforehand? So we see from the Rabbanan, for sure not. It's only doiche if you could not have done it beforehand. What Shitas Rab Shimon, the Gemara didn't speak out. Here, the Gemara is speaking it out. Both Rab Shimon and the Rabbanan don't fully accept Rabbi Eliezer. They only hold that machshire mitzvah is doiche Shabbos, only heicha deloy efsher, when you were unable to fix it from yesterday. And the reason why they are arguing whether you make a knot or whether you make a bow is because the string snapped in the middle. In the middle, really, to fix it properly, you need to make a kesher. And you would be theoretically allowed to make a kesher. Rab Shimon was afraid that if you'll get used to making knots in the middle, then when you don't need to make a knot, which is when it rips mamash by the ends, by the top or by the bottom near the pegs, then you will forget and you'll make the knot, and then you'll be violating because you don't need to violate, you don't need to make the kesher. So Rab Shimon is goizer, mar savar gozrinon, which is Rab Shimon. So you always have to make a bow, and our Tana holds that loy gozrinon, and the siyum that we have on the Kutesichus Chelik Yud Aleph, right, the Shalach Gimel, that is mentioning this din, is explaining something beautiful, and that is like this. So Rab Shimon says that really, when it snaps in middle, what solves it is a knot. But we are afraid, gozrinon, that if it's by the edge, you don't need a knot, so you have to always make a bow. You know what happens when you make a bow? A bow in the middle will come apart. It will continuously come apart. So you're going to be violating a derabanan, not one time, many times over. And the Rebbe explains the whole shittas of Rab Shimon is that whenever there is kamus versus echus, in other words, you can make a knot is normally an isur doiraisa, which is a echus de isur, but only once, versus many times making a bow. Making a bow is only an isur derabanan, but you'll be violating it many times. So which one overrides the other one? What will trump? That's the issue over here. So normally Rab Shimon holds that ribui kamus is machria echos. That's the way he normally learns. And if that would have been the case, then he would have said to make a knot, because you're only making one violation. It's worse ribui kamus. But the Rebbe adds, but bamed dvarim amurim, if both are doiraisa or both are derabanan. But if it's between doiraisa and derabanan, even though normally ribui kamus is machria echos, so we want to avoid a sin, we would do a sin that's only a one-time sin. to avoid repeating a sin many times. But if it's doiraisa derabanan, never violate a doiraisa. That's the exception that Reb Shimon says that you make a bone. All right. Weiter. Says the Mishnah. Choitchin yabelas b'mikdash. That, as we mentioned in the intro, an animal that has a wart is not fit to be brought as a carbon. Removing a wart is connected to the isur of goizes. Removing it with the shinoi, like all the other malachas, downgrades it from a deraisa and a derabanan. Because of the rule that ein shvuz b'mikdash, therefore you are allowed to remove it biyad. Says the Mishnah, choitchin yabelas b'mikdash. Are you allowed to cut it? The Mishnah doesn't say here clearly whether it's biyad. We'll see that in the Gemara. Avoloi Medina. Yeah, and all of that is doing it with your hand. And as the Mishnah says, that the imikeli, then kan vikan asur. And if you're using a utensil, which is an isur doiraisa, you are not allowed to do it. Ein shvuz b'mikdash. Generally, that's the rule. Other than the prior Mishnah, machshirei mitzvah doiches Shabbos. Other than that, shvuz is set aside, but not an isur doiraisa. Okay. Says the Gemara, I have a stira from a Mishnah in Psachim daf samachay. Says in the Mishnah regarding a person, right? The Erev Pesach is on Shabbos, and you have to bring the carbon Pesach. Head kivoy, you are allowed to carry the animal, and v'hava asim michutz l'tchum, and you can bring the animal even violating tchum. And carrying it. Carrying is an isur. Going chutz l'tchum, cutting off a wart, ain't doichen. None of these things violate Shabbos. Unlike we learned in our Mishnah, that it is doichen. Taka biyad, but it's doichen. Rabbi Eliezer oimer, doichen. So there's a stira. Now you can say that our Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer. We are obviously trying to circumvent that. If our Mishnah is the Chachamim, so you have a contradiction. So the Gemara says, let's begin with various answers. The first approach is from both Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yosi Berebi Chanina. Chad Amar Hava Habalacha, that both our Mishnah and the Mishnah Psachim is speaking about a wart that's moist. As we'll see in a moment, that if a wart is completely dried out, then it's no longer subject to goizes. Both of them are balacha. But like Hasha, our Mishnah that says that what? That choitchen is a biyad. In the Mishnah Psachim that says ein doichen, it is bekeli. Weiter v'chad Amar, the other of these two Amiroim say no hava habiyad. But like Hasha, ha balacha. Psachim is speaking about a moist wart, and our Mishnah over here is speaking about be Yevesha. The problem will be if it's a Yevesha, then why doesn't our Mishnah allow you to do it with a Keli? The Gemara is going to speak all about these challenges one has on the other. So the Gemara says, L'man the Amar Hava that Ha Biyad Hava Keli, Eruvin is Biyad, Sacham is Bekeli. Why didn't he answer? My Tamali Amar Habalach Yevesha Amalach? Because if our Mishnah would have been speaking about a dry wart, the Yevesha Fila Bekeli Nami Shari, then why wouldn't we not allow you to use a Keli? Right? Because my tama, why would that be mutter? Because ifruche, ifracha, it's already disintegrated. It's garnished using a keli. So, Amanda Amar, that the Mishnah Psachim is balacha, and ours be a vesha, and it's just to read inside Rashi has a very interesting expression. Rashi 6 lines under the Gemara. What's the tzad of the one that says that even though our Mishnah is speaking about a dried out wart, you may not take it with a keli? You're rectifying the animal. Ve'inyan malacha ka'avid. Sanayavart. It's not a doiraisa. It's not a darabanan. Ve'inyan malacha. Now the other Ramaita rejects that. Get back in the Gemara. Again, he'll tell you that if you're telling me that in Psachim we're speaking about removing it with a keli, and on that the Mishnah says you may not do it, Hatanan, here in our Mishnah it says, Im bekeli kan vikan asur, since Rabbeinu HaKadosh already taught us the din explicitly in ERUVIN that you can't take off a wart bekeli, so then it will be, redundant. The you're right. If the Mishnah there only would have quoted the Rabbanan, you would have been right. But the reason why Rabbeinu HaKadosh repeats it in Psachim, because as Rabbi Eliezer holds, it is doicha. So in order to quote Rabbi Eliezer, he also quotes Shitas Chachamim. That Psachim is biyad. Oh, so he says like this. that dumya the hirkivoi v'havayosim mechutz l'tchum tkani, which are only Yisuri Derabanan. The reason why he wanted to say that the Mishnah Pesachim is speaking about taking it off biyad, because then, if it's going to be bekeli, which means taking off the wart is violating an Isur Doiraisa, it doesn't fit with the other two dinim. Carrying an animal, according to this approach, if we're going to go like Rab Nosson, that Chai Noisas Atzma even goes on a behema, is only Yasir Midrabanan. Tchumen is only the Rabbanan. So the Mishnah is giving you two examples that are clearly the Rabbanan. So for you to tell me that the cutting off the wart is going to be done the keli, it's not going to flow. Fakert, it's biyad, because the Mishnah there is only speaking about rabbinic violations. But the other one that says that, yes, the one in Pesachim is speaking about taking off the wart bikeli, we're speaking about violating Yisur De'oraisa, because herkevoi, the other examples are also De'oraisas. Whether it is carrying, I'll tell you that the Mishnah, the Tanach Pesachim, does not follow Rab Nosson, the Amarachai Noisa Satzmoi, and therefore carrying is an Isur De'oraisa. I'm going to tell you that carrying the animal beyond its tchum is also a violation of a De'oraisa, because the Mishnah Pesachim holds, like Rabbi Akiva, that holds even the 2,000 mil, right? The 2 mil tchum, the 2,000 amma tchum is also De'oraisa, so it fits. Okay. The kid said these are the two approaches, whether kan biyad kan bekeli, or whether it's lach and whether it's dry. Masav Rabbi Yosef, and as we'll see, Rabbi Yosef is really going to challenge both of the above opinions. The Mishnah Pesachim cannot be speaking about people violating a Doiraisa. That's not the Chachamim, not like you just explained, that all of the threes are Doiraisas, because we have in that Mishnah Rabbi Eliezer continuing to explain his opinion against the Chachamim. Rabbi Eliezer, I have a Kavachaimer, that what? That it could be done, which is what Rabbi Eliezer says. Yes, doichen. Umashchita, shehi mishum melacha, doiches hashabes. So elu shemishum shvus. Elu, that means he's clearly saying that the Herkivoi, the Mishnah, yes, follows Rab Nosson. The Tchum is not Rab Akiva, which L'chayda should prove that cutting off the wart is not speaking about Bekeli. Elu shemishum shvus is enedin shitchas hashabes. So first of all, he refutes the Mishnah there is speaking about Bekeli. Rashi further explains that Rabbi Yosef is really also refuting the other approach. And as he says over here, that it can be that the Mishnah is speaking about a dry wart, because as we mentioned, if there is balach and here's biyavesha, a dry wart should be allowed to be taken off even Bekeli. He Bechlal doesn't subscribe to this inyan malacha ka'avid. So therefore, Rabbi Yosef rejects both answers. So now we need to have another answer. How do we reconcile Mishnah and ERUVIN versus Mishnah Pesachim, Shitas Chachamim? Here, the Mishnah says you could take off a wart, and in Pesachim, the Chachamim hold that you cannot. So Elo Amar Rabbi Yosef, Ha v'habiyad. So first of all, it's only an Isur Derabanan. And my friends, yes, that's the whole chain of Mishnah is that Ein Shvuz B'Mikdash. But he's saying something beautiful. You know, when you say Ein Shvuz B'Mikdash, if you are doing the act which is otherwise a rabbinic violation in the Mikdash, but not if you do that rabbinic violation outside the Mikdash. Think about it, a Koren Publisher, you think you're going to take off the wart when you come into the temple? You're going to take off the wart when you notice it on the animal. You're going to notice it when you're taking it to the Beis HaMikdash. That means if you would be allowed to cut it off, you would cut it off outside the Beis HaMikdash. So says Rabbi Yosef, Shvuz di Mikdash, only the Mikdash itiru. But Shvuz the Mikdash Medina, Allah itiru. Gavaldik. So Yosef, Abaye, and he was repeating Rabbi Yosef's teaching. Hashmaitza, and Absafra hears him. So Esvei, and Absafra to Abaye from the following Mishnah, my friends, that we just learned above. That the Mishnah says that if a person is reading a sefer on the Iskufa, let's go with the Havamina, that the Iskufa is a Rishus HaYachid. And when it's Galgala sefer Miyadeh, and it falls into the Rishus HaRabbim. Remember that? And we said that Midai Raisa, since the sefer is still partially in your hand, there wasn't a full Hanacha in the Rishus HaRabbim. You bringing it back is only an Isur D'Rabbanan. And what did the Mishnah say? Goyloloi Etzloi, because of the Kedusha of a sefer, concept of Mikdash, holiness. So we are applying a leniency, allowing you to violate an otherwise Isur D'Rabbanan, not in the Mikdash. And it's connected to a Kedusha. Hachi the Shvus, the Mikdash, Holy Svarim, B'Medinahu, and Veloy Gozrinon. Gavaldik. So the Gemara says, why? Veloy Gozrinon, we don't say that Dilma Nafel V'Asi La'asuye. So that was the kasha we have against Rabbi Yosef. So Abaye right away answers, Opa, let's go back. Let's learn Daf Tzadik Zayin Amud Beis. We actually concluded that the Iskufa was not a Rishus HaYachid. V'lo Yokimna, that's the answer, that the Iskufa is a Karmelis. And it goes from a Karmelis to a Rishus HaRabba Ma'averes Lefaneha, which means that even if it would have fully fallen out of your hand and you would have brought it back, even if you only would have been violating an Isur D'Rabbanan. And that's why we don't make Gzeira, because they even the Igdei Biyadi, Yafilu Shvus Nameleke, right? It's called like called Gzeira. So that's why we don't make it an Isur. But that's not that, but I would argue that yes, Shvus, B'Medina, yes, Shvus of the Mikdash, if it's not done by Mikdash. But still, Esvei, another challenge was asked on Abaye. Abaye was just sharing Rabbi Yosef's teaching. So really the kasha is on Rabbi Yosef. It says in the Mishnah, oh, it's good, we're learning Mishnayos, but this is really, we learned this in Shabbos. That normally, what did we learn in Shabbos? That you may not put food on the fire Erev Shabbos if it will not be fully cooked before Shabbos begins. Fully cooked doesn't mean fully cooked, it means kamachol ben drusoi. If it won't even reach that, there are exceptions. But normally you can't do that. Why? Because when Shabbos comes in, Shema yachata b'gachalav, you might stoke the coals and you might violate an Isur D'Oraisa. However, the Mishnah says that a Korban Pesach could be put into a Tanach im chashecha. Because we're not going to make a Shema, we're not going to be Goizer because it's for Kachim. My friends, that the Korban Pesach wasn't prepared in the Holy Temple. It was slaughtered there. The Zrikas Adam was done there. This was done outside the Mikdash. The Shvus the Mikdash b'Medina, and we are lenient because it's Kachim. So here you see that the leniency of Ein Shvus B'Mikdash is even the Medina. When that was asked, Ishtik Abaye did not know what to answer. So the Gemara says, so Abaye later came to Rabbi Yosef, and he told Rabbi Yosef, I shared your teaching, and someone asked me a question, I didn't have what to answer. So Rabbi Yosef, he shared with Rabbi Yosef what Rabbi Safra challenged him from the Mishnah from Mishal Shal Pesach. So Amalei, 3 lines from the bottom, Rabbi Yosef tells Abaye, "My kama loitashanale. Why did you not answer that? There's another reason why uniquely there we're not choishish, because b'nei chabura zirizinheim. That when you have a bunch of people together preparing a Korban Pesach, you can't shech the Korban by yourself unless you can eat up a whole animal. You have to have the menuyim. A Korban Pesach is done with a group. So a group, each one will remind the other not to be machata b'gachalim. Why didn't you answer that? Now, by the way, that's Rabbi Yosef's answer. But the Gemara will justify why Abaye didn't answer that. But Abaye, Kohanim are zrizinheim. Kohanim zrizinheim amrinan. Yeah, we find that many times, that they won't make a mistake. But B'nei Chabura zrizinheim, he never heard that. He doesn't subscribe to that. Lo yamrinan. So anyways, Rabbi Yosef was not, Rabbi Yosef refuted, but there's a kasha on Rabbi Yosef. And now we're going to give another way, another answer to reconcile ERUVIN and Psachim. Rava Amar. What was the whole kasha? The whole kasha is that in Psachim, the Chachamim say Ein Doichen. Our Mishnah says Doichen. But in Psachim, Rabbi Eliezer says also Doichen. Biyad. So that's here. Rabbi Amar, our Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that Machshirei Mitzvah are Doichen Shabbos. But here's the problem. The problem is that, why didn't we say it before? Because what did we begin to learn today? Rabbi Eliezer holds that Machshirei Mitzvah is Doichen Shabbos. You can violate a D'Oraisa. So why do you have to trouble yourself to remove the wart? Biyad, remove it b'keli. Machshirei mitzvah. In other words, the animal is unfit with the wart. You are doing it in order to make it fit for a korban, which is why we never gave that answer. But here's Rava's Chav. Even though, if you need to, you can even violate a biblical violation, because Machshirei mitzvah is Doiches Shabbos. Avoid is Doiches Shabbos, so taking off the wart is Doiches Shabbos. But here the last line in the Amid, Rabbi Eliezer, the Kama the Efshir Lishanuye Mishaninon. That whenever you have an option not to violate a D'Oraisa, But to make the violation lesser, only to violate a Rabbanan, even Rabbi Eliezer holds that you make a shinoi. Now, this is a svara that we mentioned above today in the beginning of the shiur, but here we're saying that this is Shitas Rabbi Eliezer. And now, Mahi, Dafkuf Gimel Amid Beis, as Rashi says, where do we find that in Rabbi Eliezer? And we will quote a Braisa, and we will successfully prove up until the Mishnah that the author of this Braisa is Rabbi Eliezer, and the Braisa is based on this rule that even when you would have been allowed to violate a Doiraisa, if there's no need to, if you are able to do it in a lesser violation, Kama de Efshed is Mishanim. The time we learned in a Braisa, Koyen should also boya belas. Now we're not speaking about an animal, we're speaking about a Kohen himself. A Kohen who has a wart is a Kohen who's blemished, and therefore he's disqualified to do the Avodah. If the wart is removed off the Kohen, then he is allowed to do the Avodah. So says the Braisa, Chaveiroi choit chaloi b'shinov. His friend removes the wart using his teeth. Now hold on, there's two issues here. Why can't he remove it himself? Number two, I get it that removing a wart with the utensil, that is, again, we're speaking about on Shabbos. That's going to be goizes. But removing it biyad is already a shinoi. So why do you have to go to the shinov? We'll have to address this. So the Gemara says, what are we trying to say? B'shinav in, b'keili loy. Nachaditel chaveroi in, ihu loy. So Mani, who is the author of the Braisa? If this is the Rabbanan who holds that preliminaries, machshirei mitzvah, bechlal don't override Shabbos. If that is the Shita, and our Braisa is speaking about in the Midrash, because even the Chachamim hold that rabbinic prohibitions are superseded for a mitzvah, right? Especially when you were unable to do it from before Shabbos. So that will be our Mishnah here. You couldn't have removed it from before Shabbos. You can't violate a Doiraisa, which is why you can't use a Keli, but make a Shinoi. However, Kivin, that can't be, because Kivin, the Amri Rabbanan Ba'alma Mishum Shvuz. In other words, the Chachamim do allow you to suspend the Shvuz B'Migdash, so Hachi Maili Hu Mali Chaveri. So as long as you're not using a Keli, L'Rabbanan, it should be good. Now, how does that help? We'll see in a moment, if it's not the Chachamim. So the Gemara says, El Rabbis Rabbi Eliezer, the Amar Ba'alma Chayiv Chatos, and V'hachi Afal Gav de Machshirei Mitzvah Deichen Shabbos. But that's the introduction. Still, uniquely, that Rabbi Eliezer subscribes, Kama de Efshel Shanuye Mishaninan. And you know what kind of shinu we make? Not only do we not do it biyad, do we not do it b'keli, we don't even do it biyad, we do it b'shinav. So the Gemara says, no, lav dafka. The whole kasha is, the whole proof, how did you prove that this Braisa is Rabbi Eliezer? Because if it's the Chachamim, Mali Chaveri Malihu, why can't he remove it? Maybe it goes according to Rabbanan. The Braisa is speaking about a word that's not in a place where you can remove it yourself. Indeed, the also be kreisai, if the word would have been on your stomach, Hachinami. Neshicha doesn't mean a bite. Neshicha means a wart. That the wart is on your back. The wart is on atzila yadav, on your elbows. The inu loimatzi shakale, that you cannot remove it, which is why the Braisa says that Chaveri removes it. So the Gemara says that's not good enough of an answer, because ve'i Rabbanan, if the author of the Braisa is the Rabbanan, and they hold that machshirei mitzvah is not doiches Shabbos, you don't even have the option of using a keli. It has to be done only in a way where it's only a shvuz, and taka ain't shvuz b'migdash, but oy bazoi, why not yad? Ve'i Rabbanan nishkulei nehele biyad. And actually, if the Braisa would have said so, then this Braisa would have backed up the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the Amar Rabbi Elazar, that the Machloikis is biyad Abel Bekeli Divrei Hakol Chayev. Rabbi Elazar is the one that understood. Look inside Rashi over here. Hachi Garsin and V'ira Baran Lishklein Ele Biyad V'Shir Elazar Kolomer I Amrat B'Shloima, that the author of this Braisa is Rabbi Eliezer. And the whole base of the Braisa is make a deviation as much as you could. Kol hecha de efshar l'shanuye mishaninan. So then we explain very well, as the Gemara speaks out. The shinoi is, yeah, you could have, theoretically you can do it bekeli, but you can make a shinoi. Not only can you make a shinoi, make a greater shinoi. That all fits. But if you're going to try to insist that the author of the Braisa is the Rabbanan, and the reason why you cannot do it with the keli is not because you have to make a shinoi, and whenever you could make a shinoi, is because the Chachamim hold that you are not allowed to violate an Isur D'Oraisa for a Machshirei Mitzvah. So you cannot remove a wart, even though if the Kohen has the wart, he can't do the Avodah. I'm sorry. So he won't do the Avodah. And it's only that Rabbanan need the only thing that's allowed is a shvus. So oy bazoi fakert that Rabbanan should have said, and the reason why it's chavedo is because, like we said, because it's speaking about the wart is on your back, and if it would have been in your stomach, then you can remove it. So then the Braisa should have dafke said remove it beyond, and then we would have been able to learn now Rashi the first line under the Gemara. Then what Rabbi Eliezer said would have been backed up from this Braisa. What does Rabbi Eliezer say? Rabbi Eliezer is in Shabbos Daf Tzadik Dalet that machloikis biyad bekeli moidu rabbanan dechayev chatos, because everyone subscribes, like we mentioned, that removing a wart is a tulda of goizes and gavaldik. And then it would have been clear that the machloikis, whether you can remove it or not remove it, is whether you are allowed to violate an Isur D'Oraisa, which would be generally the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, or whether Machshirei Mitzvah doesn't allow you to violate the Isur D'Oraisa. And therefore you have to, what is allowed? Only if it's a shvus. It would be a lot clearer had they said, if it would have been the author of the Rabbanan, that you have to do it biyad. Why are you doing it biyad? Not because kol heicha de efshel shanui. No, you're doing it biyad is because you're not allowed to do it bekeli. Biyad, you can do it. The fact that we go further, not even biyad, but bekeli, that has to be based on this svara. That even when you are allowed to do something, if you are able to do it in a level where it's even a greater deviation, deviate even more. Go as far away as you could from a violation. Oh. Let's read it now inside. So Ula Taimei, go back, the Gemara says, but if the Braisa follows Rabbi Eliezer, then Rabbi Eliezer also, why don't we say take it off with your hand? So the Gemara says, no, that's exactly the whole concept of Kol Heichel de Efshel Shanuye. Hai Mai, I Amrad Bishloim Rabbi Eliezer he, Hainu de Gazar, Yad Otu Keli. Rabbi Eliezer holds you can remove it with a Keli. Machshirei Mitzvah Doiche Shabbos. Eloma, make a Shinoi. So you go more. If you'll do it biyad, you might do it with a keli. To go the farthest away from a keli, you have to give this unique din. Take it off with your teeth. But if our Braisa follows the Rabbanan, the only reason why you do it biyad, not bekeli, is not because you try to make a shini, it's because you're not allowed to do it bekeli. So the Chachamim should say their shita very clearly, which is that D'Oraisa is not Doiche Shabbos. Shvus, but Midrash is Doiche Shabbos. Do a shvus, do it biyad. Yom Rabbanan, he nishkalei the helo biyad. And the fact that the Braisa says take it off, the Bachaveiroi I get, it's just technical. But Beshinov, there's nothing more I need to say. The author of this Braisa is Rabbi Eliezer. And Mikan, that Rabbi Eliezer holds, Kamo, the Efshel Shanuye, is Mishaninon. Beautiful. And that explains our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that you take it off biyad, not bekeli, because you could take it off biyad, even though theoretically you should be allowed to take it off bekeli as well. Okay, next Mishnah, again, continuing the series, a kohen who has a wounded finger, right, can wrap his finger with a reed grass. A reed grass had some sort of curative effect. It's not directly connected to the avoida. Ain't shvus b'mikdash when it's avoida related. It is avoida related. Avoida related meaning that it's unseemly to have a kohen with an exposed wound doing the avoida. Zok the Mishnah. Kohen shaloka be'etzba'oi. Yes, koirach olav gemi b'mikdash is allowed to wrap his finger, his wound, with a reed grass. Avaloi b'medina, because the Chacham do not allow us to take medicines on Shabbos, because we might end up grinding herbs. Now, im lo hoitzi dam means that you want to wrap the reed grass very tightly in order to make blood leave the wound. That's not soirech avoida. In other words, it's unseemly to have a wound exposed, but to make an additional effort, to make an additional healing, first of all, it's worse than just healing. First of all, it's not soirech avoida at all. And number two, Rashi says, extracting blood from a wound, that's called chayvim. Chayvel is an isur d'oraisa. And I know that we began today's share learning the exception when it comes to making a kesher on an instrument string, but that's the exceptional case because avoid is like Shabbos. Normally, ein shvuz b'mikdash, but one cannot break a biblical malacha on Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash. And chayvel is an isur d'oraisa, which is why you cannot wrap it around to the point where you are extracting blood. Good. Says the Gemara Amar. And whether it's Rav Yehuda, whether you have Rebbe Yehuda, Bereder Rav Chia, that loy shanu, that the Mishnah does allow you to wrap the wound in the kohen with a gemi, taka only a gemi, only a reed grass. Abel tzilzil cotton, but a small belt cannot be worn by a kohen. Why? Something unrelated to what we're learning now. A new din, have a yitur bigadim. He's wearing, and we don't need these pictures. It's an additional baguette. In other words, a kohen hedyet abra begadim, kohen gadol shmoine begadim. You're not allowed to wear an additional baguette. A belt is called a baguette. Upa. But Rabbi Yechanan Amar, no, I disagree with you. That loy amru yitur begadim ela b'makim begadim. You're right. You're not allowed to add begadim, but that only goes if you are wearing an additional baguette on the place where you are wearing a big day kahuna. There's nothing on the fingers. Now, guys, make no mistake. There is an issue of chatzitza, which means the kohen cannot put, let's say, a glove, even according to Rabbi Yechanan, not because of yitur begadim, because lakach hakohen, we had that so many times when we learned kachim. But here we're speaking about putting the gemi in a place where it's not going to affect at all a chatzitza. So Rabbi Yechanan holds shaloi b'makim begadim. There's no yitur begadim. Abel shaloi b'makim begadim.
Rabbi, why is it not a chatzitza?
No. We're speaking about putting it on in a place where it will not render a chatzitza. Just for example, if the wound is on the left hand, the Gemara is going to speak about it in a moment. And he's not using that hand in the avoid at all. That's the next line. V'teipu klei mishum chatzitza. In other words, why are you telling me this is a kasha on everything? How can you wear a gemi? How can you wear, according to Rabbi Yechanan, the small belt? Everything. Why isn't it a chatzitza? So either you're wearing it on your left hand, inami biyamin v'shaloi b'makom avoda. You know, you can't have, if you're holding a klei shadis, so you hold the klei shadis with the inside of your hand. If there's a wound on the outside of your hand, then we're speaking about putting on some sort of correlative reed grass or belt where it will not affect the chatzitza. Okay. Now the Gemara says that the statement of Rabbi Yechanan, which is a gewaldige statement, that the whole prohibition of a kohen wearing additional begadim is only if he's wearing them on the place of a baged. Upliga de Rava. Rava disagrees with that because the Amar Rava, Amar Rab Chizdeh, that like this. The marking begadim afilu nima achas choitzetzets. We're learning about different types of chatzitza, not to get confused. The first statement of Rava is speaking about a kohen who has even one thread that is in between the big day kahuna and his flesh. So for whatever reason, a strand went on his arm. Now he's wearing the tunic. So even one thread creates a chatzitza if it's in between the beged of the kohen and the body of the kohen. Shaloi b'makim begadim. If there is something on the body of the kohen, but not in between the beged and his body. So Rava says, if it is shalosh al shalosh, if whatever is there has the size of three means 3 finger breadths. Whenever we speak about a finger breadth, we speak about the width of a thumb. If it has that size or more, then it's choitzetzes. Rashi says choitzetzes doesn't mean chatzitza. Choitzetzes means yitur begadim. And not like Rabbi Yechanan. It means if the kohen is wearing something shaloi b'makom begadim, it has to have a certain minimum shear. Right, the small belt, you can argue maybe doesn't even have that shear. But the concept that if he's wearing something 3 by 3 or larger, it creates a chatzitza. Only if it is pachas mashal shalosh, is it einoi chaytzetzes against chaytzetzes, means it's not yitur begadim. Okay, so Nachman, Rabbi Yechanan gives a klal that a kohen cannot add to his garments, but only if he's wearing it in the place of the garments. Rava disagrees with that. Clearly, Rava holds that if any beged has 3 by 3 or larger, no matter where it's placed on the body of the kohen, it's choitzetzes, means it is yitur begadim. So Ad Rabbi Yechanan, Vadai, this statement of Rava argues with Rabbi Yechanan. Question is, what about the small belt? In other words, what did we begin? The sugya began that Rav Yehuda or Rebbe Yehuda says, a kohen can wrap a gemi, but he can't put a small belt. A small belt is already yitur begadim. A small belt is not 3 by 3. So l'cha'ura, Rava also argues with Rav Yehuda, because Rava is saying that you are allowed to wear that silsil cotton. It's not yitur begadim because of the size. So l'cha'ira ad Rav Yehuda b'rei Rav Chia mi nema that also plige. So the Gemara says no, that's not necessarily true. Farvas, because I can counter by saying that normally Rava agrees. He agrees that you may not wear a small belt on a wound. When did Rava say that only if the garment has 3 by 3 or larger is it considered chashuv, and that's called yitur begadim? That's if it's not a chashuv garment. But when the moment you have a tziltzul cotton, if you have a small belt that is mamish made to cover a wound, it was made in that size, that gives it chashivos, the chashiv, and maybe Rava will be moida that our Mishnah is dafke, gemiya. I curated in shvus b'migdash. Tziltzul cotton aser because of yitur begadim. It's not 3 by 3, it's considered chashiv. Guys, we have the same sugya like when it comes to B'chlal Dinei Begadim. We had this in the beginning of Shabbos. We have this throughout, whether it's made out of tzemer or pishtim, like what's the minimum size for a beged to be chashuv a beged? Remember all those dinim? And many people challenge, for example, today, many kinyanim are made a kinyan sudar. It's common that a Rav is going to pull out his chassidish skinny gartel to make a kinyan sudar. That gartel is very little. It doesn't have any of the minimum shiurim for a keli. And the reason why it's accepted for it to be used from the same concept, that if something was lechatchila made like a little gartel, this stringed gartel, it's chashuv. It doesn't need to have whatever the minimum share is. When we're speaking about a patch, that's where we say that it has to have a minimum size or larger, very similar to the Gemara's argument right now, that even though Rava argues with Rabbi Yochanan, but Lav Dafka Rava argues with Rav Yehuda B'rei Rav Chia. Guys, we'll stop over here and we will continue the Lishna Chrinas Pashat. We'll chop that in, God willing, tomorrow. If it's possible, I'll see today, then maybe we'll start just a little bit early because we're almost finished and we'll break up tomorrow. Let's see if we can start, 5:45 or 5:50, max the earliest. And then we'll divide it in half. And like this, tomorrow we can finish both dafim, Kuf Dalad and the Kufay. That will give us 1 daf credit for Pesach already. And then if that will do that, I'll just text out later, then God willing, then Wednesday morning we'll begin. Yasher Koyach.
Amen.
Sure.